I just want to thank you all for having taken out time to come here and share this evening with us, which for me is a very special evening. Since it's about the two books which have been translated in English of memoirs of my parents, Rajendra Yadav and MANNU BHANDARI. Actually, the original, the Hindi version had come out many years back. First, Rajendra Yadav's Mud Mud Ke Dekhta Hoon, and a few years later, almost kind of in response to Mud Mud Ke Dekhta Hoon, was MANNU BHANDARI's memoirs, Ek Kahani Hai Bhi. But they both came out separately from Rajkamal Prakashan, and there was a gap. What makes it so special today is that the English translations are coming out together. So it's almost like both coming together is more special and has a different meaning for me especially. A few years back, when Poonam Saxena approached me and said that she wanted to translate these two books in English, honestly, I was very reluctant to give her permission, which I don't think I've told Poonam ever. No, I didn't want to. Simply because I just felt that these two books were books where they both had expressed their deep emotions, and they had fairly candidly put their thoughts and pretty much, at certain places poured their heart out. And their life, their thinking, their world was Hindi. So I felt that anything, if it is translated, it'll almost be like violating their space, or probably will never be able to do justice because they thought in Hindi. So I was not keen at all. I mean, a lot of their fiction work has been translated, which is fine, but this was too personal, and I just felt that it will never be the same. But then later I thought, and there was also a part of me, the advocate for translations and how translations are important today, so that part kind of took over, and I said, okay, let's go for this. So Poonam started the work. I think it took her almost 4 to 5 years. I have seen translators working. I have worked kind of with a couple of translators, but I must say that I have never seen this kind of involvement in two books. Poonam literally immersed herself for the last 4 to 5 years. She was literally living in their lives. It was very much like that. Apart from not just these books, she was reading everything on them, their other work, their diaries, everything. And laboring over each sentence. She wanted to discuss anything where she felt she had a doubt, either with me or Sanjay ji. Especially Rajendra Yadav, she had a tough time doing. But and when the final drafts came to me to read, and I was going through them, I never felt like they were not the originals. So, I mean, that's what my feeling is. Rest, the experts are here to talk about the book, so I won't say too much. But I think it was done wonderfully. And today, I think Poonam knows these two writers more than any of us, or even me, their personal lives or their literary lives. So, and going through those drafts for me was like reliving my years with both of them. So it was emotional turmoil. It was at times hard. At times it was, I also was making fun of certain things, looking back. So it was a very, very personal experience for me to these two books when they came out. I'm very, very thankful and grateful that Mrinal Pandey ji and Ashok Vajpayee ji agreed to talk about these books. Very few people today, Mridula ji is sitting here and few others, who have witnessed that era. and been a part of it. And I have witnessed that era, but as a child. But I see a lot of difference between that era of the literary era, that time and today. Lot of difference. There was a kind of openness, and I know that both Ashokji and Mrinalji had their differences with my parents on many issues, but dissent was part of that bond. Dissent was not taken as anything that, that you become enemies. They were all living in that world, interacting with their arguments, with their agreements. And it was just, I think, a very, very beautiful and a very, very productive and a very positive kind of an environment, which I feel is missing today. I again would like, I'm sure they'll talk about it a little, but I'm really thankful for, and I know my mother was very fond of Mrinalji. She used to come, I have clear memories of you coming home, and she used to come in her trousers and jackets and a peak cap, I remember, and my mother used to say, she looks like a mischievous boy. And she was really very fond of you. So I have those memories, and I would also like to thank Suneet Tandon and Suhaila Kapoor for having agreed to do certain readings, certain excerpts, and really grateful and thankful. Maybe we'll start with the evening with the readings. I would like to invite Suneet and Suhaila to start the evening with reading out certain excerpts to generally just, I guess, set a little tone for the evening.
The English translations done by Poonam, just as Rachna said, I mean, they are really actually terrific translations. They read as if they are original, and I think that's the highest praise one can give to a translation. We've had a lot of help from Poonam in selecting the passages from both the books, and so I hope you enjoy. We're not going to take too much time, but just to give you a flavor of the writing, of the quality of their frankness, and the other aspects of these memoirs which Rachna has already referred to. Little more? Is that better?
Hello.
Okay.
Hello. Yes.
Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So it's obvious who's reading who, right?
You are reading Mannu?
Absolutely right. This is not my autobiography. At the most, I can call it reflections of the soul or fragments of my story. Autobiographies are written by people who can, with the help of memory, arrange their past in an organized fashion. No matter how much you try, it is not possible to hide your efforts to trim and prune the facts to your advantage. See how many deep valleys I've had to go through to reach where I am today. Behind the choice of peaks and troughs is the assertion, this is who I am today. In other words, you can call this a fabrication. Whether it is the life story of an individual or a culture, neither can be free from fabrication. Both are fiction. Providing real names of people and places is merely a creative device to make the fiction sound credible.
I want to make one thing clear. This is not an autobiography, which is why I have titled it Ek Kahani Ye Bhi. Just as a story is merely an element, an aspect, a facet of life, this too is just a piece of my life, mainly focused on me as a writer and on my literary journey.
One day I got into a scrap at the school. Balbir hit me on the ankle with his hockey stick. I turned round and hit him on his shoulder. I came home and told everyone I'd sprained my ankle because I had worn new shoes. Despite hot fomentation, massage, a mix of local remedies and medical treatment, my foot continued to swell. There was no improvement, even after a month. X-rays, medicines, chloroform, operation. The bone from the knee to the ankle had wasted away, and there was no option but to remove it. My stubborn and short-tempered Pitaji dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief again and again. Then another operation. Lying down, my leg tied to its frame, in between all the bittersweet medicines, injections, and changing of bandages, my imagination soars. And the stories that I read or that are narrated to me add fuel to the fire. I dream all day. All day, I try to write something or the other. I abhorred being seen as pitiable or depending on others for support. I wanted to make up for my physical deficiency in other ways. Meeta, Didi, and Mannu. All three helped me a great deal in getting over this complex of mine. I had asked all three of them, "You must feel so embarrassed that I'm lame." Each one of them, on different occasions, gave the same reply. Anyone can have an accident at any time. Suppose you were in the military and got hit by a bullet. Would we have left you? I will say it was Mannu's extraordinary courage that living in Calcutta's closed society, she married me openly, not in secret. Chalo, forget caste for a moment. Anyway, these days no one believes in it. But what made Mannu Bhai Sahab choose a lame man? Mannu must have heard this or versions of it many times. She was an extremely popular teacher in her school. The girls worshipped her. She was cheerful and energetic. When her students heard about us, they were shocked.
I also realized that while my relationship with Rajendra falls within the purview of my personal life, it is actually an even bigger part of my life as a writer. We married because of our writing and became husband and wife. At that time, I felt as if by marrying Rajendra, I would immediately be on a grand highway to writing, and that was all I desired then. How did I forget that as soon as I got married, my personality would be split into two parts: writer and wife. There's no doubt that Rajendra motivated and encouraged me as a writer. The literary environment and gatherings that I became privy to because of him were a great source of inspiration. But as a wife, I was at the receiving end of Rajendra's constant negativity and onslaughts, and it was the writer in me that bore the brunt. The setback in my writing as a result of continuous battering of my self-confidence eventually led to a full stop.
I want to break all traditions and leave myself free and unrestricted in this sea, and to see what it's like to live a bohemian life in the true sense of the word. What is all this setting up house, stroking and caressing middle-class values? But I have to fight the traditions imparted to me by my determined mother every step of the way. And I'm held back by my attachment to loved ones.
No sooner had we started our life together that Rajendra, in the name of a writer's compulsions, presented me with the latest pattern of marriage. Parallel lives. Look, we will live under the same roof, he said, but our lives will be our own. We will not interfere with each other, and we will be independent, free, separate. I was speechless. I was not familiar with this very modern concept of living. Not just unfamiliar, I had never even imagined such a scenario in my mind. Nor had Rajendra indicated anything like this when we were friends. I had come with him to dispel distances, to become one, for us to become immersed in one another. After listening to him, I felt that while I'd been given the reassurance of a common roof over our heads, the ground had been pulled away from beneath my feet. The The one question that hammered away at me was this: what was the need for a roof then? What was the point? I understood this much at least. This idea of parallel lives that had suddenly cropped up in Rajendra's mind had come from somewhere else. But Rajendra has never had the courage to accept reality with any honesty, at least not in my context. That's why he habitually dug out some formula or the other to cover every lie, every obstinate idea, indeed every unjustifiable act, sometimes invoking modernity, sometimes in the name of his writing, and sometimes some other concocted bit of philosophy that could prove him right.
For me, the most inspirational moments are those I spend listening to people or reading books by others, never mind who they are. Mannu says, "This is how your ego gets satisfied." She herself talks in a very entertaining manner. She gangs up with other people and makes fun of me and grumbles, "If he didn't have such and such traits, he'd be very good." This list of undesirable traits is extremely long and changes every second. I accept the fact that she's not destined to have a good husband. I advise her to get one, and I go off to sleep.
They were strange, difficult days. The biggest difficulty was the way Rajendra's acutely conscious ego created complexes within him, which prevented any kind of relaxed, easy pace of life. It was impossible to figure out when or what would offend him. We'd be laughing and joking, and I, or someone else, would say something perfectly ordinary, but it would hurt his self-respect. Anyway, it wasn't in my nature, nor was it my habit to think too much before speaking, nor is it today. If he'd expressed his anger or distress, he would have felt lighter, and it would have been easier for me too. But Rajendra would be mute. Yes, his face, and more than that, his behavior would make it evident. I kept trying to find the Rajendra I knew before marriage in this silent Rajendra Yadav.
Mannu was the one who pulled me out of this pit. "I know you're a freelancer and don't have a regular income. I will never burden you with running the house." And truly, Mannu got a small flat on Calcutta's CIT road and did it up nicely all on her own. She hired a servant, and looking at this unimaginable comfort, I thought with some surprise, yes, this really is my flat. Sometimes I'd feel uneasy that, "Rajendra ji, you've also finally fallen prey to that predictable clerk kind of mentality." I wasn't used to so much order in my life. She managed everything, from looking after Tinku to college, tuition, her own writing, taking care of the guests who were in and out of the house. It was all up to her. Mannu's protest began only when she found out that I took this situation so much for granted. I brushed off every kind of domestic responsibility. There would be no money in the house, and I would take an advance from my publishers and push off to the hills with Meeta. Mannu was there to toil at work, and Meeta was there for the good times. Today, I accept that I was unjust and unfair to Mannu. I was at fault, I was guilty. But perhaps I was simply not made for domesticity. Mannu was a simple, straightforward and trusting girl. Her dreams for her home were exactly what she had seen of her brothers and sisters: children, a house, a husband dedicated to his wife. I was constantly breaking her trust with my misdemeanors. I had more or less become a villain in my own eyes and in the eyes of friends and acquaintances. Today I feel I was probably so immersed in myself, I couldn't be a good husband to Mannu, a good lover to Meeta, or a good friend to Didi. My daughter didn't have a good father, nor my sisters a good brother. It's as if I don't have any real communication with anyone. It's all nothing but formality.
Seeing my first story published in a magazine thrilled me to the core. I've never felt a similar thrill again, though many other important events have happened in my life. The making of a film, Rajnigandha, based on my short story, attending its Silver Jubilee function, getting a huge, exciting response from readers for my novel Aapka Banti when it was serialized in Dharamyug, the unforgettable staging of Mahabhoj, its reviews in all the newspapers, but no, I never experienced that same thrill again. By making a film based on Rajendra's Sara Akash in 1970, Basu Chatterjee had established a special place for himself in the world of artistic films. If its success delighted Rajendra, it made Basu come up with new plans and projects. He spoke to me about filming my short story, Ye Sach Hai. There's no doubt that I found the proposal quite thrilling. My only hesitation was how this internal dilemma in a young girl's mind and heart, for which I too had to resort to a diary format, could be presented visually. When I mentioned my apprehensions to Basuda, he said I should leave it all to him and just give my consent. Not only did the film celebrate a silver jubilee, but it also picked up 2 Filmfare Awards, the Critics Award, often given to an art film, and the Public Award, given to a good commercial film. An article published in Filmfare pointed out that this was the first Hindi film in which there was a love triangle, all right, but it didn't have that compulsory climax, the presence of a villain. The audience's sympathy is with all the 3 characters equally. There's no doubt that it felt really good to know that this was the first film to get both awards at the same time, and perhaps no other film had this good fortune again. This kind of success for my very first film, even if it was released after a long wait, not only filled me with self-confidence, it also made me keen to explore this new field. Writing was never my first priority nor my main concern in my order of preferences. I had to find the time and convenience to write while I looked after my daughter and my home, for which I had full responsibility, and managed my job, which was necessary to execute my responsibilities. Whatever I wrote was not at their cost, but in the middle of fulfilling these responsibilities. In the beginning, there were crises and problems at every stage. There was hardship and distress. There were nerve-wracking traumas. But with all that, I somehow continued to write, whatever the quality of the writing. Today, these crises and problems are all but over. But the writing is over too. So, is a life full of struggle and problems a necessary precondition for writing?
I ask myself whether my obsession with being free and independent is in fact another name for a license to be wanton. I want a house, and at the same time I want a free run without any responsibilities. Is this constant recharging for the sake of creative energy and ideological independence? Or is it a perverse expression of repressed sexuality caused by the inferiority complex of being incomplete, which repeatedly seeks reassurance from the other that you are indeed whole? It's true that I like the opposite sex and the company of women. They give me inspiration and energy. But after I was past the age when I was curious about the body, actual sex has never been of primary interest to me. That's why even after all these decades, my friendships, in which there was a lot of openness and frankness, but no sex, as is generally understood by the term, are still my support. I always had the desire for such emotional friendships. Compared to friendships with men, these are far more reliable. When Mohan Rakesh's diaries were published after his death, I had asked why there were no serious observations about any literary issues in his diary entries. Nor was there any mention of any book, except in a couple of places. Even the comments on his male friends and fellow writers are in passing. Yes, year after year is filled with girls. Su came, Ku went, Ba got married. No one knows where K is. Why just Rakesh? Even Kamleshwar, Bharti, Naresh Mehta, Shrikant Verma, Agye, everyone's written and unwritten diaries are full of the same Ku and Su. Where are the people in our artistic, cultural, academic, social and political life? Even Nehru, whose lives are without the scandal of a Ku and Su. Is this wantonness an individual moral lapse or an assertion of one's independence? The first thing is that wantonness can't be unilateral. You need a second consenting party, and this gives it the form of a social problem. Unfortunately, the second party has to deal with so many taboos that in this context, I still haven't seen a woman's bold, fearless confessions to date, at least not here. Perhaps a woman's fragile social position doesn't allow for this. I've never heard from any woman's pen or directly from her that she's had a physical or emotional relationship with any man except her husband. Some English or Punjabi writers or Marathi actresses have no doubt exhibited such audacity. As far as Hindi literature is concerned, they're all paragons of virtue, ideal goddesses. It's only the men who are depraved and characterless, plundering their innocent celestial purity. This has given birth to God knows how many mental and social perversions. Maybe in the 21st century, there will be some women writers who will be equally free and will accept their complicity in such immorality. Or could it be that all these moral taboos automatically wither and fall away so that they are no longer questions of life and death? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would now like to request Mrinal Pandeyji to please come, Ashok Vajpayee ji, Poonam Saxena, and our moderator for today, Akshay Mukul. Before we start our conversation, I would request you all to... So, after the translations and the draft, Penguin brought out these books, and these are beautifully produced books, designed and produced books. And I would like to thank Vaishali Mathur and her team for working so hard on these books. Vaishali is here, I think. May I also request Hans editor Sanjay Sahai ji to come up on stage for the release of the books. Yeah.
मुझे सिर्फ राजेंद्र जी वाली मिली, मन्नू जी वाली नहीं है।
Why is it?
ओह, एक और, दो और चाहिए
जी। और किधर?
have you got more? I want one more मन्नू। Sure.
For the photo op.
Here.
Yeah. Rachna, hold. Yeah. Vaishali, hold.
वो ले गए यादव जी अशोक भाई अभी आप हो वो नहीं है इस बात पर ही हंस लो
Something which
हो गया?
what is this? Where you have to shift. Your seat.
जी 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 मैं शिफ्ट कर रही हूँ.
And over to you, Akshay. इसको थोड़ा हटा देते हैं. I think it is obstructing.
So, we have around 45 minutes, I'm told. So we'll dive into the conversation right away. And I want to start with Poonam. Something which Rachna mentioned when she was introducing the books is that why them and why together? And you have done translations across genre. You have done short stories. You have done Dharambir Bharti. You have done Rahi Masum Raza. Why memoirs and why together and why them? Yeah.
Can everybody hear me? No. I don't know what to do. Is this better? Yeah, okay. So Akshay, actually, I had read a lot of Mannuji's and Rajendraji's works, novels and short stories, and I really I liked their, the way they wrote their novels, the themes they explored in the short stories also, and I was just very taken up by them and also by the Nai Kahani movement.
Okay.
Subsequently, I read both. I read Mannuji's memoir first, and I was profoundly moved. And because she had mentioned her husband Rajendraji quite a lot in the book, I really wanted to know, so who was Rajendraji? What kind of a person was he? What kind of a man was he? And of course, I had read his novels and short stories, but that doesn't give you a proper picture. So I picked up his memoirs, and once I read Mud Mud Ke Dekhta Hoon, then suddenly the whole marriage and their story acquired a kind of completeness, which I didn't get when I read just her book, and I wouldn't have got if I'd only read Rajendraji's book. And I felt that I wanted to translate both books so that readers could read both and see their relationship, their writing, their marriage, the times they lived in, their different takes on so many, so many aspects of life, and form a full picture, as to why, how it's different to translate memoirs and short stories and novels. It is actually quite different, because when I started translating the memoirs, and this happened particularly in the case of Rajendraji, so they're obviously real stories, and he suddenly mentions a person, a place, a time. I don't know who this person is, because he doesn't explain, he doesn't put a context. So I had to write all these things down. Bhai, ye kaun tha? Ye Satyendra kaun tha? Kuntha ji kaun thi? Calcutta mein kahan the ye kaun si naukri kar rahe the, And then I had to find a context for everything as far as I could find out, because some people, even, despite making a lot of inquiries, some people we could not account for exactly who they were. And I felt that even a reader who's reading it may suddenly wonder, ye kaun hai log, And that's why I decided to put it in the notes, so that sometimes when you're reading, you don't want an archan, you don't want to be obstructed, you want to keep reading. At the same time, sometimes you're reading, you're saying, who is this? What is happening here? So then you can go to a note and, find out. So it was very different, because I had to do a lot of, you may call it research or finding out, which you don't really have to do in a novel or short story. You read it and, you translate it the best you can. So this aspect was very different for me. And, there's another school of translation which says, ab jaisi hai, waise hi translate kar do. Why do you have to find out who was this one, who was that one? But I personally thought that Rajendra ji was writing at a time when a lot of his readers would have known the context of a lot of the names. And I felt for an English reader, English-speaking person, they would not be familiar. So I felt I had to put in that effort and try and explain as much as I could. So, yeah.
So that brings me to both Mridalji and Ashokji. You know, between them we have the history of the last 70 years of Hindi literature. Together, both sit down and kind of... huh? No, so no, the question is first to you, Mridalji, is आपका जैसे घर में आना जाना था, जो रचना भी कह रही थी. So could you make out that they were leading two lives under one roof?
Oh, it was very obvious.
Okay.
I don't know, I got to know her first as a writer's daughter. My mother was a writer, and Mannuji came to meet her when we were in Delhi, and I'd read her and I liked the stories, and I was very thrilled that she was coming to visit my mother. And my mother, being the kind of a person she was very maternal and affectionate, and she also liked Mannuji's writings a lot. Those were the days when Dharmik was serializing her novel Aapka Banti, and she went back quite happy. Then later, at a couple of literary get-togethers, Hindi literary get-togethers, I met both of them, and I asked some questions which probably led her to saying that I was a mischievous boy. But I was quite thrown back by the bitchiness of the whole scene. You know, writers were lovely to meet individually or in twos, but as a group, it was like meeting a pack of hounds. And very often people asked me, you know, तुम्हारे घर में इतने लेखक आते जाते थे, so many writers came to your house. What do writers talk about? I said they mostly bitch about others, or they discuss royalties and their publishers. So, for example, I was noticing Jawahar Chaudhary in the write-up as a publisher, and he's spoken of with great affection and warmth. Well, my mother had a fairly nasty take on him because he never paid her royalties, if at all.
Too many, actually.
And every time my mother said, जितनी बार मैं उससे royalty मांगती हूँ, वो कहता है मेरी लड़की की शादी. She said, God knows how many daughters he has. Daksh Prajapati had 17 daughters. Jawahar Chaudhary's daughters just don't seem to disappear. So my mother finally decided that she would take all her books back from him. Then he became the struggling publisher and came to her and fell at her feet. A big drama, the kind of which we were not really exposed to in our house, and we were quite embarrassed by the whole thing. And कि शिवानी जी मैं मर जाऊंगा, मेरे बच्चे मर जाएंगे, ये वो. So I found Mannu ji, Rajen ji quite refreshing in the sense that they could also see this. So when I went and sat with them as a duo or singly, they would talk about it and laugh about it also. And Rajen ji had a very mischievous habit of encouraging gossip and nasty talk about other writers. And he would say, ha. Then I soon wised up to it, and I thought this fellow wants to shoot his gun from my shoulder. Ki Mrinal aayi thi, wo ye keh rahi thi. Mrinal, of course, was known for a long tongue. So my mother said that she liked Mannu Bhandari a lot as a writer. But she said, Rajen, आदमी ठीक नहीं है पर लिखता अच्छा है. You know, so the two then got equal in her eyes. She loved Jahan Lakshmi Kaid Hai, for example. She said this is the first time someone has had a courage to write about what happens in small town middle class families where girls are really, really captivated, kept hidden from public eye, because the father wants to make some extra money. Anyway, so she was not so happy with Rajenji's avatar as an editor, because again, as an editor, he was an excellent editor. He had an eye for good writing. He also edited well, but then he couldn't get over the habit of encouraging, you know, people who wrote shocking things. And it was not just to sell hunts, because God knows he didn't much care about amassing money or getting big ticket sums for his magazine, but he just enjoyed it. And that I thought was a bit of a perverse kind of enjoyment. Mannu ji was very straight. She was very straight, very straightforward. If she liked someone, she said so. If she didn't like someone, she didn't say so. But my mother, she told my mother several times, Shivani ji, how do you balance your writing and your home? So my mother said, I balance my writing more, the home balances itself. So, I don't know, I mean, everyone has a different life, everyone has different experiences, but they were, both of them, very strong writers. And they broke new ground, because I think up until the late 50s, which is when I really started reading hell of a lot as a critic and a budding aspirational kind of a critic. Till then, there was much more philosophy. You know, Jainendra ji or Agye ji, you know, they went into these philosophical flights. Jivan ye hai, jivan ke liye ye mithya hai, ye avashyak hai, ye hai falana dimag hai. And here was this duo writing frankly. Sale aisa kar, aisa kar. Not just, you know, using bad language, but also in her own gentle way, Mannu Bhandari was laying bare the inner emptiness of a working woman's life, the kind of compromises she has to make, and also the, Harish will recognize the phrase, contrapuntal tensions. Contrapuntal tensions between a husband and wife, both of whom are creative, but somehow the other, the wife was luckier with the film world, in the sense that her books somehow became better known, better celebrated films. His didn't, though the writing was good, but for some reason they didn't. Her writing became a celebrated theatre piece. Amala Lana handled it with aplomb, and Mahabhoj became, although Mahabhoj is not a very strong political novel compared to what is coming out now by way of political writing. But in those days, it was something new, and Amal handled it extremely well. So it became a kind of a showpiece. And then, at the same time, I'll finish by saying that what saddened me a lot was to see that people lived in locked-up worlds in Hindi and in English. So for those who read English, spoke English, had been to English medium schools and pursued literature as though English was the only literature in existence. Hindi was something like a Shudra, you know, it was another world. It was untouchable, though if they were polite, they would say, "Hum kya kare?" We studied in English medium schools, and my Hindi is not very good. I studied lower Hindi. So fine, I mean, that's another story altogether. But this has led to this crisis in translation now. When you translate writers from 60s and 70s, you need to contextualize them, as Poonam very wisely noticed. And then, I mean, Kunthaji was a household figure to us, tiny little woman, wife of Lakshmi ji, and Lakshmi Chand Jain of Gyanpit. I mean, they were like mascots for us. Gyanpit ke Kunthaji and Lakshmi ji, Kunthaji ke yahan ja rahe hain, Lakshmi Chand Jain se mil rahe hain. I'd grown up, you know, looking at these people. They used to talk to my mother, they used to talk to me when I joined Times of India and started a Hindi magazine. I was interacting with them. And then my office was very close to, my first office in Daryaganj was very close to the great Adda that Sheila ji held in Rajkamal Prakashan, where all these people came together to sit and bitch about each other. And there were famous squabbles and quarrels and verbal duels, which were duly reported to me by my by my underworld connects. So I never attended any of those, which made Rajenji very angry. He said you should sit and उठना बैठना चाहिए लेखकों के बीच में. तो मेम साहब बन के अलग से बैठी रहती हूँ. So I said नहीं, मैं मेम साहब ही नहीं करती हूँ, मज़ा लेती हूँ. पर मैं आऊँगी नहीं आप लोगों के यहाँ. क्यों नहीं आओगी? बिकॉज आप लोग बहुत बुराई करते हैं. I told him once, I said, you are a very, very intelligent man, but in your heart of hearts, there is a कस्बे की लड़ाकू औरत जो हाथ नचा नचा के, अरे तुमने सुना उसने ये किया, अरे तुमने सुना उसकी घरवाली भाग गई ट्रक ड्राइवर के साथ. सो आई सेड कि दिस काइंड ऑफ लेशिवियस कैटल अपसेट्स मी. एंड आई सेड आई लव द हिंदी राइटिंग. The Hindi writing that is being produced, and 60s and 70s and 80s produced some of the best Hindi writing. But I said, in time when people talk about these and a context is required, then what kind of context shall we say there was? We can't lie, but at the same time, the fact was also that the context was vitiated by the small size of the pie which came in Hindi's, which came to Hindi. Most of the Hindi writers in those years came from small town India or from rural roots. They were very, very tight for money. Not many of them were lucky enough, like Rajenji, to have a wife who worked full time and earned a regular salary. A lot of them, I was personally privy to their struggles. And I mean, Jawahar Chaudhary, may God rest his soul, had a point. He told my mother, हिंदी पब्लिशिंग में पागल लोग आते हैं. He said, आप लोग तो पहले ही पागल होते हैं लेखक, लेकिन हिंदी पब्लिशिंग में हम जानबूझ के पागल बन के आते हैं. So which broke my mother's heart, and she said, चलो आज पूर्णिमा है, मेरा व्रत आज छोड़ती हूँ.
So that brings me to...
So that was my kind of world in which I moved. And then outside this, there was also the official Delhi world, in which I moved, and I saw faces which were deadpan, which had no interest. And they came to listen to classical Hindi music, and I said, what the hell are they, are they following the bandishes? What the hell do they know about the background of the singers? What the hell do they know about the tabalchi and the harmonium wala who will be waiting at the gates of IIC at 10:30 at night, and no three-wheeler will take them? So there were two parallel lives. जो समांतर जीवन राजेंद्र जी कहते थे, maybe he was not able to articulate it, but what I gathered from his writing and from his talks was that yes, there is a split in the Indian mind. There is a split in the Indian urban scenario. There is a split in the heart of the literary scene in India, where these two parallel lives are lived. And they flow together. They hardly ever come together. When they come together, then they waste time in recriminations and in cursing each other and grabbing what the other has. But they don't really interact. There is a kind of an unspoken hierarchy and an unspoken caste system between vernaculars and English. And that saddened me.
Ashok ji, your memories of the couple, you knew them. You knew Rajendra ji more, or did you get to meet Mannu Bhandari? Yeah.
अब वो वाला माइक ले लीजिए.
हाँ, ये ले.
आप ये ले लीजिए नहीं तो.
Actually, I knew Rajen ji much more than Mannu ji. By the sheer fact that I was drawn to the ideological and intellectual battles, and I thought of myself as a warrior. And there were these other warriors, including Dhanveer Bharti and Rajendra Yadav and Namvar Singh and such like. So, Rajen ji...
Guerrilla wars. Huh? Namvar ji never came out in front.
No, I mean...
he always has his shikhandis lined up.
Anyway, when I was studying here and I started writing about poetry, I used to run into Rajendra Yadav, Mohan Rakesh and Kambleshwar in tea house.
Yes, that was it.
There used to be groups sitting, and each group used to, of course, make derisive remarks about the other group. And at least I remember twice, both Mohan Rakesh and Rajendra Yadav tried to persuade me that why are you writing about poetry? Poetry is a backward genre. You should write about short story and novel. Fiction is the new thing. And I used to laugh away and I used to say, "Kya hum kahan kya hai?" Wagara, wagara. Many years ago, Rajendra Yadav came to Bhopal in a function to speak on the novel. And he again publicly now made that I have been trying to tell Ashok Vajpayee to forget about poetry and to start writing about fiction. So in response, I said, I know cricket is a more advanced and complex game than kabaddi. And kabaddi is a laid back. But I know only how to play kabaddi. You can't ask me to start playing cricket. So that is how they start. But when I came to Delhi, no, before that, I tried to bring out a special issue of Purvagraha, the journal I used to edit, on Jaishankar Prasad. And taking the cue from the TLS, which had asked for poets to write poems using an image or a line, whatever of Shakespeare, on his 400 or 450th anniversary, I thought, why can't we do this in Hindi? So I wrote to several people, letters asking them if they could use a character and write a new story, or take a line, write a new poem. And we were planning a special number. The only one who wrote was Rajendra Yadav. Surprisingly, he had never written anything for Purvagraha. Purvagraha was an enemy journal in that sense, but he responded. He was the only one who wrote that piece. We published it, but the special number could not come out because we didn't have the material. When I came to Delhi, a little after that, the Hans annual function started. And every now and then, like Mridula ji perhaps, I was invited to speak. And I remember once, Varvar Rao, the Telugu revolutionary poet, was to come. And they used, Arundhati Roy was also going to come. But both of them didn't turn up. Varvar Rao arrived in the city but didn't want to come because he thought that I represent the corporate world. And I mean, corporate, I have nothing to do with it. I had never done anything with corporate support at all in my life, in my career. But somehow Mr. Varvar Rao thought that. And since there was a huge audience there, I had finished my bit. And Rajendra Yadav sent me a chit to carry on, because Varvar Rao is on the way. So I have finished my 15-minute piece, but I carried on. It turned out to be a 40-minute piece. Me being a loquacious and a talkative person could carry on with all kinds of episodes and this, that, and the other. And Varvar Rao didn't come. Then started a different dialogue with him. Hindi writers, like any other group of writers anywhere in the world, are a bit of a mess. Yes. I am reading a memoir of Colin Wilson. You know the great name, Outsider in the 60s, the Outsiders were the beatniks and all that. And this angry young man, about whom the chutkula used to be, they are angry without purpose, they are no longer young and hardly men. But this is what angry young men. And the memoir, and they're very big names, John Osborne, John Wayne, etc. They are big names in English literature. They all had morally such a terrible life. Each one of them, almost each one of them. And they run out after each other's wives and they seduce all kinds of women here and there and go. a wife employs a girl secretary for a theatre critic of the times, because that theatre critic could not be sexually satisfied by his wife, etc. So, I mean, these are kind of messy stories. But the point is that ultimately, Rajendra Yadav, in spite of he was a mischievous person. Mischievous person in the sense that he had a dushta buddhi, like me, sort of a bit try to find out, he wouldn't go all that straight. I think Mannu Bhandari, on the other hand, was a kind of a reticent person, not very much about herself, did not talk much about herself, wrote very candidly but quietly. Hers was not an intrusive public posturing, which Rajendra Yadav could not do without. He was a public figure. And he became a public figure not through his fictional writing. He became a public figure because of Hans. And I think the editorials of Hans in the history of Hindi literature have not evoked such response as any other editorials that Rajendra Yadav evoked. Then he had the good sense, and I think a very timely sense, of promoting two kinds of writing which had emerged in Hindi. One was the Dalit writing, and the other was the women's writing. And these two got such a big editorial support from Hans that they were writers. I mean, Mannu Bhandari was part of a trio, Krishna Sopti, Usha Priyambada, and Mannu Bhandari, etc. In some ways, Mannu Bhandari was a better success as a writer, and Rajendra Yadav was a better success as a public intellectual. Mannu ji never wanted to be a public intellectual, and Rajendra Yadav had accepted perhaps that he is no longer full of creative energy, so he stopped writing, but his editorials became, and he used to love controversy. And he used to, I mean, there is a reference somewhere, Archana Verma, I think, makes that reference about us. I mean, the Bhopal school of aesthetes, which is not something which I had not heard before. For the past 40 years, we have been hearing this. There's a Bhopal school and the Bhopal school of aesthetes. And there was a time when my own colleagues in the IAS used to think, देखो कितना अच्छा अफसर था, आजकल नचइयों गवइयों के पीछे लगा रहता है. So we thought that I was no good. Culture was looked down upon and things of that kind.
Someone offered you a harmonium.
Well, and about these two books, when the books came to me, I started wondering why the English reading public be interested in these books. I mean, they're not part of the literary culture of Hindi, and they would not perhaps know who the deuce these two persons were. And there was a literary culture in which they could survive in the way they wanted to. And there are you read them together, you cannot fail to start comparing them. And the moment you start comparing them, you're pushed to judging them as individuals, which is not the job of literature. Literature's job is to stop you from judging, actually to adjourn judgments. Just look at what reality is. The second point is that all fiction, and this is fiction, she calls it fabrication. You have to fabricate. Even your life is a fabrication by memory. And it will always be inadequate, because life is much larger, bigger, more complex, more surprising. So there will always be something that you choose and something which either you have forgotten or you are willfully avoiding. And this happens in these books as well. But this is not a fault, this is an aspect that even their life has been more than this. And
I wanted
it
to
is,
ask something regarding that only.
Yeah.
Rajendra Yadav is otherwise very bebak. And he's also very critical of memoirs where he's
yeah.
But he himself here doesn't talk about politics at all.
Yeah.
So do you find this a huge contradiction?
Well, if you read the books, you will not be able to get a feel of what was happening in the Hindi world,
Exactly. Yeah.
which I expected would be there. But this, when मुड़ के देखता हूँ छपी थी, उसके बाद एक बार उनसे कभी बात हो रही थी, तो मैंने कहा ये आपने ऐसे लिख दिया है जैसे आप ही के बारे में सारी दुनिया है, और दुनिया कहाँ गई? उस दुनिया में जिसमें हर दिन आप हस्तक्षेप करते हैं। कहा नहीं, वो तो अलग,
अलग लिख चुके थे सब।
हाँ नहीं, वो
महीने लिखते थे।
नहीं, वो तो कहते थे वो तो मैं अलग से करता ही हूँ। हमने कहा अलग से तो आप करते हैं, लेकिन जब आप एक स्मृति लिख रहे हैं तो फिर but that's it's his decision to put in. You cannot criticize a person for not having done, except that from the book you expect a chronicle of the times.
Which is
It
not,
is not a
it's not
chronicle of the time. You get a snatch, but they do not cohere into anything significant or meaningful.
So, that brings me again back to Poonam and Mrinalji is like, how do you think they were different as writers, both of you? If you can
Is
take
this
one by
okay?
one.
I think Manuji's writing, her short stories, are like Manuji herself, or like Manuji herself. They're very straightforward, very simple, but they pack a punch. And she's a very focused writer. If you read her novels, Mahabhoj and Aapka Banti, so Aapka Banti is a very intense and kind of granular look at the trauma of a 9-year-old boy whose parents have divorced and married other people, and how this boy feels he doesn't belong to either family. And it's very sensitively done, and it's very emotional, and you feel quite close to tears when you're reading it. Mahabhoj, on the other hand, is a political novel, and it's about political scheming and manipulation, and how, in the end, the victims are the ones who are punished, and the perpetrators get away and triumph. It's a sad novel in that sense, and it's very sharply focused on just that. I found both novels so different, and considering Manuji was always put in the pigeonhole of a woman writer, for her to attempt a novel like Mahabhoj was, I thought, very interesting.
And very quick also. So
Yes.
It's on Belchi massacre.
Belchi massacre, right, in the 70s that happened. That's what triggered the idea for
By
the book.
79, I think novel was out. and
Yes,
massacre happened in
yes.
77.
She writes that when that happened, she was very upset, and she couldn't sleep at night, and she felt she had to write something, but there was nothing forming in her head as to what she could write. She said there was just a lot of emotional reaction of horror and sadness and all that, but that was not enough to do a book. So she finally suddenly remembered a character from her childhood, a politician who she calls Da Sahab. And once she remembered that character, and then she read about how in an election a particular candidate had won who was actually a murderer, and then suddenly the whole book came alive in front of her with a structure and everything. Rajendra ji, on the other hand, his short stories, which I also love very much, is a much more complex and layered writer. And his novels, for example, if you read Sara Akash, which is my favorite Rajendra Yadav novel, it's a beautiful novel, but he has this habit of getting into, his characters get into these long discussions. So he wanders off into some lanes and by-lanes while he's writing his novel. In Sara Akash, for example, there's a discussion, it was written in the early 50s, about the Hindu Code Bill. Hindu Code Bill aayega to kya hoga? And the hero of the novel, Samar, he's a sort of slightly orthodox boy. He says, लेकिन हिंदू कोड बिल आएगा औरतों को तलाक का, you know, they'll have the right to divorce, they'll have the right to inherit. इस तो घर में तबाही हो जाएगी और मारामारी हो जाएगी and families will break. So there's this long digression in a way in the book where this Hindu code bill is discussed by two characters. So he likes doing that kind of thing, you know. He suddenly goes off into a little tangent, which is interesting. So he's not as tightly focused, I found, as Manuji is in her stories. And his writing, he's a beautiful writer. But her writing seems very instinctive, and his seems the result of sort of effort and thinking, and I have to make my short story really good, and it must be like, you know, must have symbolism, or it must have layers. She doesn't get bogged down with all that. She just tries in her later years as a writer to introduce a bit of satire, and she does that very well in stories like Stri Subodhini and Trishanku and Kartute Marda and all that. She does it very well. So she doesn't get engrossed in trying to figure out how to make her stories clever or smart.
So
I think that's the difference.
Did you feel conflicted while translating? Were you taking sides? Did you feel you were taking sides?
So I'm going to be really honest here that obviously as a woman I felt very close to Manuji. However, I didn't really want to be judgmental about Rajendraji. It's not my business to judge people. My attempt was to try and understand him. And I think he was very much a man of his time who was raised with certain values, like a lot of men of that generation. And he had a lot of self-awareness. He was aware that he had these drawbacks in him. He in fact says in an interview that you know, he was a big sort of champion of women's equality and women's rights. However, he acknowledged very, very sincerely, in a way, and sadly, I would imagine, that they were uncomfortable with intelligent women. He said men of his generation did have a hard time just coming to terms with women who were working, knew their own minds. And he gives a very nice example of Mohan Rakesh's novel, Andhere Band Kamre. I don't know if anyone has read it. In Andhere Band Kamre, the protagonist is a journalist called Madhusudan, and he has this very smart journalist girlfriend called Sushma. But when he has to choose somebody the person he's going to stay with, he chooses this lower middle class, hardly educated woman who's the daughter of his erstwhile landlady, and he, you know, rejects Sushma. So he gives that example to say that men of my generation did have a problem to understand and accept, you know, the sort of changing women that we encountered. But he has self-awareness. And he understands that there is something he has to fight. So I felt I needed to understand him. I was not interested in judging anybody.
Yeah, okay. So now there's a question both to Mrinalji and Ashokji. Mrinalji, you can go first. What was it about Rajendra Yadav? His behavior was completely inexcusable when it comes to MANNU BHANDARI. And yet we find that he's kind of forgiven. He's still part of the inner circle, or he's the center of the circle of that group. So what was it about him that people kind of forgive him?
He was, as a friend, he was a very lovable, cuddly kind of presence. If you could match wits with him, if you were well read, and you could, you know, give him back as good as you got, you could be very good friends with him. But you felt that you sensed here was a man who was trying, you know, like someone else we know, different clothes and dresses, different ways of presenting himself to the world, you know, his dark glasses, he's smoking a pipe. I mean, for heaven's sake, I mean, a pipe. And I found that streak not only in him, but several writers of their generation. Mohan Rakesh had the same fixations. He smoked cigars. You know, they just wanted to somewhere, at some point, identify with the upwardly mobile class that they, you know, wish to interact more with and, if possible, be a part of. Mohan Rakesh told his publishers he could not write without an air conditioner. He had come to India after partition, lived, a very, very difficult life with a very loving mother who helped him survive. But once he became successful, his cigars and his typewriter, in those days a Hindi writer typing out stories was in itself quite miraculous. All these, I found that these male writers in that generation, including a gay, excuse me, he's a great friend of yours, but they were good writers, but they were also writers who were brought up in a very different kind of a ecosystem, and all of a sudden they were catapulted by their talent in the midst of a very, very complex, evolving nation with layered caste and class hierarchies. And being sensitive souls, they wanted to belong, but at the same time also wanted to kick out and yell at. And then Hindi became also one of the things. It was their total identity. And yet you hardly found, even Yashpal's Jhoota Sach, if you read about the grand Hyderabad house or wherever they had those dinners in those days, the bureaucrats talking to each other and using English, discussing Sanskrit and English, Yam adhikamapi manogya. Manogya, what do we call manogya in English? Well, actually there's no word for manogya. Hindi में गाँव की बोली में है गड़ासा, मन को काट देती है, मनोज्ञा, that is मनोज्ञा. So ये हो रहा था हिंदी और इंग्लिश के बीच में, क्योंकि मैं थोड़ी बात हिंदी में करूँगी क्योंकि हम हिंदी लेखकों के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं. दो तरह की उछालें ऊपर भर रही थी, हिंदी और डायलेक्ट्स. हिंदी और हिंदी के साथ की जो बोलियां थीं, अवधी थी, उसमें ब्रिज भी थी, उसमें भोजपुरी भी थी, मैथिली भी थी, फणीश्वर रेणु की बोली बहुत स्ट्रांग, मनोहर श्याम जोशी की उत्तर कुमाऊनी भी थी, ये ऊपर उठ रही थी. और आकाश में जो बड़ा स्पेस था वहाँ इंग्लिश थी. Whether it was feminism, whether it was social sciences, whether it was, any other, economics, politics, anything. The biggest and the most high-level discussions were taking place more and more in English. So people with fresh ideas and a fresh language which could express the ground reality found themselves a little puzzled. They had the material, but they lacked the kind of duality of languages with which they could communicate with both sides. And that, I think, also made them very complex and hard to gauge individuals. As Poonam rightly says, we must not judge them. They were products of a time. Yeah. But I also wish, like Ashok, that Rajenji had brought out more about his times, because after all, as an editor, he gave a huge forum to Dalit writing, to writing by OBCs, people from OBC communities, to women's writing, though he was more or less out of his depth in feminism. He had a very superficial understanding of feminism. The part of feminism which made women bold and ready to, fornicate with men other than their husbands, that part appealed to him. But at the same time, he was also judging them for being harlots, what kind of a woman. So he marries Mannuji, who is in a way a woman of her times. Like my mother, you just cannot imagine her ever having a fling of that sort and not talking about it first to her husband, frankly. She was not cut out that way. She was all there, she was transparent. But Rajendra Yadav lusted after women. That's true. I occasionally punched him and slapped his hand off, and I told him, keep your hands off me. Don't you dare touch me. So he said, बड़ी feminist बनती हो. I said, feminist बनने का मतलब ये थोड़ी है कि आप जहाँ चाहें, जब चाहें, जिस तरह से चाहें behave करें. But he understood that and he laughed and he was okay. And we had our quarrels, but more on literary genres and his take on several things, and several editorials he wrote, which I found very superficial and deliberately hurtful to various people and communities. But he had much to learn about feminism, and I think towards the end he was becoming aware of having misjudged the sterling qualities of his wife and having over-expected feminism to provide him fodder for his libido all through the years. But all in all, he was a good, strong writer. But both Mannuji and he had a limited repertoire. They wrote about the places and the times that they had lived through, and they brought out the small town life. One thing more I noticed in this generation was their fear of being clerks. You know, somehow the other, whether it is Mohan Rakesh, whether it is Manohar Shyam Joshi, whether it is Rajendra Yadav, all these writers of
Clerk
that generation had a moral horror of, even Raghuveer Sahai, Shrikant Verma had that, you know, moral horror of ending up as a clerk or in a clerical or semi-clerical job. Even Bachchanji in his autobiography writes that when Nehruji proposed that he come here as a Hindi officer in the for the foreign service officials, he did not realize that it was a kind of a glorified clerk's job. And he was not too happy after having come here and seen what a tiny little cubby hole of an office he was given, and how little he was consulted, and how little need they had of Hindi interpreters or consulting up on Hindi literature. So it was a very complex generation which was struggling with languages, which was struggling with personal lives, struggling also with familial lives. A lot of them had I think Rajenji came from a family of 9 brothers and sisters. Mannuji came from a more prosperous background. She had many more sisters. Both of them had overpoweringly harsh fathers. So in a way, it was also a revolt against father. We have Gyan Ranjan who writes about from the same thing. So it was a generation which reflects, to my mind, a whole lot of things that small town, middle class India was undergoing. And it was no accident that nearly all of them sent their own children to English medium schools. And I don't think anyone had children who wrote in Hindi thereafter. You know, I meet their children a lot of time. Like, you know, children of addicts, children of writers have a way of getting together. Somehow we warm up to each other. You meet them, they're lovely, intelligent people. They remember their parents, they remember my mother also. But at the same time, they can't write a word in any Indian language, no matter where they come from. And that, I think, is a loss.
So it's
to the, I don't know, I just don't refuse to judge my writing. I just do it and then leave it for time to judge. But I think this is an important part of understanding this book, that these are people who are going through very, very tough times, personally, politically, socially, and editorially also. And they are doing the best they can. And it is almost miraculous that a woman like Mannuji from a Marwadi conservative family with an Arya Samaji background and a very, very strong father came out and was able to write a book like Aapka Banti.
In fact, her father disapproved of her working.
Yeah.
Of course,
And the question now to Ashokji, what was it about him that people couldn't throw him out of their lives? And related to that, what do you think is a lasting legacy as an iconoclast editor or a writer? Okay. So So the question is that again, why people couldn't throw him out of his life, their lives, and what is his lasting legacy as an iconoclast editor or writer? Which again, both of them, when you talk, he's more inaccessible than Mannu Bhandari, who is far more accessible. So what do you think?
Well, Rajendra Yadav was a very intelligent writer. And Mannu Bhandari was a writer of wisdom, which came from experience and sensitivity. not from reading this, that, and the other. It is remarkable that this Nai Kahani trio, they were all good short story writers, but almost all of them failed as novelists. I mean, they didn't question the form of the novel. They questioned the form of the short story, but they failed to question. The novel was being questioned by Panishwanath Renu, had been questioned earlier by Janendra Kumar, by Agge, by Hazari Prasad Dwivedi. These are the people who were not accepting the realistic framework of the novel, but they questioned in the short story, but failed to question it in the novel. One. Two, Mohan Rakesh became editor of Sarika. It is not a journal that he started. Kamleshwar also had editorial stints here and there. But the only person who decided to start a journal of his own was Rajendra Yadav. And whatever may be the failings and faults and lapses, etc., any journal cannot be the ideal journal. But Hans succeeded in promoting and identifying a large number of young writers and gave them the forum. So this is something which he alone of that generation did. The others got hold of a journal, were appointed to a journal already existing, supported by. Here is a journal by a writer who has there's no financial stability at all, and he launches into it and finally makes it into a popular, well-regarded journal, whatever may be its other difficulties. As for the lasting, who are we to judge that? But I would say that some of his short stories, Jahan Lakshmi Kaid hai, etc., would be remembered and would survive. A lot of his editorials will survive. In case of Mannu, both her novels and her short stories are likely to survive. In the long run, I think what is deeply human rather than deeply intelligent survives better.
But this is again about coming back to Mannu Bhandari, and this is a question to Mrinalji and Poonam, even if you can chip in, is that, when she leaves Rajendra Yadav finally, and then starts a long period of, when she, what was Sohela was reciting, when she just can't write. What went wrong? In a life of full chaos, you have a husband who's like everywhere else except home. She's producing, and she's producing great works. The moment she separates, this whole period, she's not writing anything and she's regretting it. How do you see it?
Well, incidentally, let me point out, recently, Gyanendra Pandey, the historian, has studied several autobiographies and come out with the book Men at Home. And it includes autobiographies of Rahul Sankrityayan, Shivrani Devi, etc. Also Rajendra Prasad, the first president of India. In a married life of 45 years, he did not spend, and this is upon his own admission, even 45 months with his wife. So there were these public men who were so involved in public life that they hardly were at home. So so what I'm trying to drive at, that here this is not simply, shall I say, which cannot justify whatever happened, but the public demand, as far as understood by Rajendra Yadav, also played a role. you know, when you become a public figure, there is an expectation, and that you succumb to that temptation in some ways, and then your life starts being guided by what is in demand rather than by what you should be doing. So there are these moral failures, and the only thing that can be said is many of them have been candidly admitted by Rajendra Yadav. Very few writers in Hindi have admitted their moral lapses. So at least in this respect, he remains in a small but unique category.
And Mrinalji, how do you see it? A complete long phase of...
Well, it puzzled me, frankly. As an editor, I was an editor all through that long period. Mannuji was not productive. And I kept asking her personally on the phone. I went to her house, met her, sat with her. And she said, Mrinal, meri kalam uthti hi nahi hai. So I said, what is it? She said, I don't know. She also had a severe neurological problem. Part of her face was almost on fire all the time. She underwent a lot of treatment for it. She said partly it is this unbearable pain, but she said the doctor says that the neurological pain is triggered off by extreme anxiety. She was a very sensitive person, and God knows, what kind of stress and tensions that she had bottled up inside her. I tried my best to get her to write. And I said, I can come and you speak to me and I'll write it down, I'll record it, I'll write it down myself, I'll edit it, I'll bring it back to you. Because she was a very precious writer to me, and in that generation there were very few women who wrote as she did. And she just couldn't. She just couldn't, and so finally I had to leave it at that. She had to, and she suffered. It was not as though she accepted it and was, laid back and peaceful in her alienation. She was not. She was restless. She was unhappy about not being able to write. But she said, I can't explain it. I just cannot pick up the pen and write. So that remains a puzzle, a sad puzzle to me.
I think she's given some hints about it in her memoir. Writing was her big connection to Rajendra Yadav. I mean, that was what had drawn them together in the first place, and that was the strong connect between the two. I think when her connection with Rajendraji broke, something broke in her writing as well. And I think she herself says that till the writer in me was in the forefront, so to speak, I was all right with Rajendraji. But when the woman in me and the wife in me वो उभर के जब आने लगी, then the writer in me took a back seat, and then I just, couldn't get back to writing.
So you kind of, both of you have interacted with writers across generations. As I said, 70 years of Hindi literature is in both of you. 80 years, in fact, Ashok ji just pointed out. So what do you think the great difference between the writers of that generation, and I mean both Rajendra Yadav, Mannu Bhandari and others, Mohan Rakesh, Kamleshwar, Amar, everyone, and now in Hindi? If you can just, because people have interacted across languages.
Well, their generation was probably at a cusp when Hindi was coming into its own. It was getting a kind of expressiveness and acceptability, primarily because of the growth of newspapers. Yeah. Since 1920, for the 35 years that preceded their writing, a big space was created for consumption of writing in Hindi, in good Hindi. And Hindi meant that it would be Hindi mixed with various dialects that the writers themselves spoke from whatever region they came. There were different kinds of Hindi. Bhartendra Harishchandra, way back in 19th century, pointed out कि हिंदुस्तान में 12 किस्म की हिंदियाँ बोली जाती हैं. उसमें एक रेलवे की हिंदी भी है जिसमें एंग्लो इंडियन वर्ड्स बहुत सारे होते हैं. So this was a very exciting period. It was like a period when suddenly things come to a head and the lava comes out, but it cools as it sets. So you get a feeling that it is something which is flowing hot and alive. And it is setting. Sometimes it sets well, sometimes it does not set very well. But it is hot, it is alive, and it has a lot of the writer in it. So as children, we grew up in the hills and we had very little else to do except read. And I read voraciously, and my aunt was a great patron of Hindi writing, and so was my mother. Between the two of them, they had a vast library of short story writing and magazines. So we started with Bhairav Prasad Gupta's Kahani, then he took over Nai Kahaniyan and the whole Nai Kahaniyan movement. So like children today discuss the latest video game, on our dining table we used to discuss the latest short stories, you know, इस बार उसकी आई है, अमरकांत की जोंक आई है, फलाने की आई है. And those dialogues, some of the dialogues became family dialogues to be repeated. I remember Krishna Sopti's dialogue from one of the story about Tista River that she has, the novel about Tista. What is it? I forget the title. Inna aaye tapanna bole Shri. We found it very comical because we felt that she was being very pretentious. So when my mother was disappointed in a house guest, then all of us would stand up and say, "Na aaye tapanna bole Shri." So they became kind of part of our larger family. My cousin Pushpesh was also growing up with us in our house. So we brothers and sisters, we all sat around the fire and read all day long. So we kind of developed a great affinity with these writers, and we also learnt about so much about lives other than our own limited lives in a small Brahminical society in Uttarakhand town, you know, where we were beset with an Anglo-Indian culture which was departing, and a fierce nationalism that was being spawned and promoted in our schools, where still we took out Prabhat Pheris on 15th August and 26th January. So it was that kind of a time that these writers came out of. And I think when the history of India is written, a lot of people ask me, why don't you write your memoirs? You've seen and lived through so much. And I said, I don't want to be in it, because no writer can be an honest autobiographist. You know, you cannot write. The moment you pick up facts, you begin arranging them compulsorily into a readable text. And then, without even realizing, you begin to snip and smudge that which does not appeal to you. But a wider sociological history of the times that I have lived through, and the wider sociological development of migrant communities in India, a lot of whom found place in the Uttarakhand hills. My father's family came from Konkan, my mother's family came from Saryu Par, my husband's family came from Saraswat stock. So all these people came and settled in the hills and started intermarrying. And then it was like there was no one else except us in the universe. You know, we were perfect. We were so intelligent. We were so good. We were so good looking. You know, we felt that we were the top of pops. Till we read these short stories, and then we suddenly realized, you know, how big, how pulsating, how overwhelming the real world was. So I think it was not just us, but even children sitting in Bulandshahr, in Bada, in, you know, small town India, anywhere, Farrukhabad, Ghaziabad, Shahjahanpur, they would all be realizing the same thing through school libraries, the world that they brought. And Dharmyug Saptahik Hindustan became iconic magazines because they carried serial novels and they carried short stories. My mother's was like Charles Dickens. People waited for the next installment of his serials. Seniors in the hostel, when we went to the university, used to bully us into asking our mother to end a novel happily and not kill the heroine at the end and stuff like that. So people really lived literature, which I don't see happening now, primarily because the Hindi readership has changed. You know, people who came from 2-3 generations of Hindi literacy and had grown up through various developments in the Hindi belt and also the organic development of literary movements and literary stalwarts, all of a sudden begat progeny who chose to, you know, specialize in other languages. They learned French or they learned Spanish, but very few of them opted for higher Hindi, even in English medium schools. So the readership changed, and now a new kind of readership television has given to Hindi, which is very poor in written Hindi. So I was telling my sister that we came from Vachik Parampara, and then we moved to the Likhit Parampara, and now we are going back to the Vachik Parampara. When Hindi will be a heard word, but people will hardly ever sit down and read. And those of us who can read and also can talk will be in very short supply, and one day, poof, will vanish. And then everybody will be asking, what is the context to this? Who was Kuntha Jain?
Ashokji, now you, and it has to be kind of sorry.
No, I
Sorry.
say very
Told the
briefly,
time is running
I
out.
talk, yeah, we have run out of time anyway, run out of patience of a lot of audience. You see, if you describe the literary culture, the writers were well read. And they have not only well read, by the time the modern took over in Hindi, they were well read in modern literature elsewhere. We in our small town called Sagar had finished reading Tolstoy and Rabindranath Tagore and Dostoevsky by the time I reached my 11th class. And all in Hindi translation at that time, whatever bad translation they were, but they were the only ones. But from that, the writers, Rajendra Yadav, although he did not betray that, was one of the most well-read fiction writers in Hindi. The only one who could match him in reading experience was Nirmal Verma. The rest of the writers, I mean, including friend Mohan Rakesh and Kamleshwar, they were not all that well-read. Rajendra Yadav was very well-read. And many of us who came to writing thought that without reading a lot, you can't write something significant and new and meaningful or whatever. Sadly today, we have come to a situation where most young writers in Hindi are very poorly read. That they don't read much of literature elsewhere is fine, but they're poorly read in their own Hindi literature. So they do not know sometimes that what they are saying has already been said much more memorably and much more succinctly by someone else. Because there is a loss of cultural memory, which is part of the larger framework of the Hindi belt itself. All the big gharanas of Hindustani classical music were in North India, largely the Hindi belt, and none of them survives there. These gharanas no longer exist there. They have all shifted. They have gone to Maharashtra or Dharwad or Bengal, wherever. There is no Banaras in Banaras, there is no Gwalior in Gwalior, there is no Agra in Agra, there is no Jaipur in Jaipur, there is no Kirana in Kirana. Kirana comes to notice when a Muslim allegedly keeping a piece of beef in the fridge was killed.
Yes.
So Kirana, which had a great
Musical heritage.
sort of one of the great gharanas, Kirana is no longer known by that great gharana, it is known by this hideous event. So there is a vast cultural collapse. That is why we have the Hindi belt. You should listen to these figures. The National Crime Bureau report says that hideous crimes relating to violence, murder, rape, etc., 68% of them take place in the Hindi belt alone. 68%. Now, this can't be accidental. And these are figures by the National Crime Bureau of a government whose no figure can be trusted. So you have these figures of the National Crime. So what is happening is there's a cultural,
Emptiness. Emptiness.
a cultural void. इसको हिंदी में कहना ज़्यादा ठीक है. ज्ञान का जितना अपमान और अज्ञान का जितना महिमा मंडन हर रोज हिंदी अंचल में होता है, उतना और कहीं नहीं होता. And all kinds of things are happening. This is where we have landed. So to remember people like Rajendra Yadav and to Mannu Bhandari it was always difficult. It is always difficult to be human. You will always be pitched against hundreds of odds. But literature cannot but survive as literature if it fails to make you more human than otherwise.
Thank you. So we have time for 2-3 questions. So please keep it, just 2 questions maybe. Just keep it really short because we've really run out of time. Yeah?
No, तुम क्या पूछोगे?
Anyone? Yeah. Who? Yeah, Subra.
I thank you for this lovely conversation, which I was really thirsting to listen to, because as someone who has grown up with the Saptaik Hindustans and the Muktas and the Saritas, which were not those two because they were salacious stories for little kids, but the other Hindi magazines, and for people like us who grew up in bilingual homes and went to convent schools where that was English and this was Hindi. तो हिंदी बोलना और समझना और बात करना कर सकते हैं, लेकिन फिर भी थोड़ा सा there's a click. Anyway, congratulations on these 2 wonderful books, Poonam. I'm dying to read them. But I wanted to ask you, what were your main challenges when you came to writing something about intimacy, and did you actually think of leaving things behind? What was your process? Just curious.
Leaving things out of the books?
Yeah.
No, I don't think that was the idea at all. The books are what they are, and I think if the authors themselves have been so fearless and frank in writing the books, I am no one to, cut or take something out. And if they were, as I said, candid enough to write this, I was not upset in any way, or I didn't feel at any point that ये नहीं लिखना चाहिए, उन्होंने लिखा है तो हम क्यों नहीं उसका अनुवाद करेंगे, that was not my job at all.
Come, thank us.
Rachna's really saying that
Yeah.
we have to get up and go now.
The reason I'm saying is because I believe there's a fire near Safdarjung Safdarjung Airport. So all the traffic is jammed. So please do not take that route, and people are getting really delayed. So I don't want people reaching at 11, 12. But thank you very, very much. Thank you, Mrinalji, Ashokji, Poonam, Akshay. And thank you so much, Suneet and Suhelaji. Thank you everyone for coming, and I hope the books are there. Do pick them up if this conversation has aroused some curiosity in you, just to read the books. Thank you so much.